off. Media reports say that the French government told the organizers of the exhibition to shut them down. France, a long-term Israeli ally, has gradually hardened its position on the government of Benjamin Netanyahu over its actions in Gaza and military interventions abroad. The BBC's Hugh Schofield has the details.
Overnight, officials at Le Bourget in northern Paris surrounded 4 Israeli stands with black screens, effectively barring access to them. They were acting under orders from the French government, which said the companies had ignored instructions not to show offensive weapons of the type that might have been used in Gaza. The Israeli Defense Ministry said the move was outrageous and unprecedented. The French, it said, were hiding behind supposedly political considerations in order to exclude Israeli weapons that competed with French ones.
Let's now recap the top story. The third group of South African soldiers returning from the SADC mission in the Democratic Republic of Congo has landed at Bram Fischer International Airport in Bloemfontein in South Africa's Free State province. The 220 soldiers are returning home as part of a phased withdrawal from the mission area. For any news stories that you would like to share with us, please do send us an email at newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 11 714 4459. For Channel Africa News, I am Nolutando Butelezi.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
In our sports headlines, Zimbabwe businessman has injected a financial donation to the struggling Zimbabwe football giants, the Highlanders. An American golfer, J.J. Spawn, will collect $4 million for the biggest payday of his career. I'll be back with these and other stories at the bottom of the hour.
It is a very good afternoon to you, Nigeria. Good afternoon, Ghana, Senegal, Eritrea. Good afternoon, Zimbabwe, Zambia. Good afternoon, Africa. Welcome to Africa in Business on Channel Africa. I'm Thami Ngubeni. This is where you get the African perspective. It's where we meet to look at the latest in news, sport and business. Broadcasting live from our studios in Johannesburg, South Africa. It is exactly 7 minutes after 4 p.m. It really is a fabulous day in South Africa as the country marks June the 16th, a day where we commemorate the struggles of the youth of 1976 who fought for the democratic freedom, a South Africa where all are deemed equal. Today, South Africa acknowledges their strides as well as looks forward to what still needs to be accomplished for a united and free and democratic South Africa. Welcome to It Africa. This is Africa in Business.
From markets to innovation. From markets to innovation. Africa in Business with Thami Ngubeni covers it all. With Africa's future in focus, Channel Africa, the African perspective.
We begin here this afternoon with a look at Nigeria's food security. The Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security in Nigeria has confirmed that a leaked memo calling for prayer sessions to end hunger in Nigeria is an initiative of the ministry's Human Resources Management Department for the well-being of staff members. Some Nigerians have responded by questioning the government's commitment to the task of bringing down the high cost of food. A press release from the Agriculture Ministry on Saturday downplayed the issue, saying the call for prayers was not an official policy to tackle food insecurity, but was intended to boost staff well-being. For more on the story, we joined this afternoon by Channel Africa correspondent in Nigeria, Jonathan James Mlemgo. A very good afternoon to you, Jonathan. Good to be talking to you once again.
Good afternoon, Thami, and welcome to a new week.
What an interesting topic and what a point of controversy. Have you actually seen this memo and what exactly does it say?
Yes, Tammy. I also I got hold of a copy of the memo, and it is indeed very interesting and very funny, and clearly underscores the reason to be very conscious in today's age and time when you put out any form of communication, especially one that is considered to be an official communication. The memo sure did look like a standard type memo that comes out of, if you're familiar with how ministries and government agencies tend to work. It's just a typical memo that you would often see when you walk into government agencies on notice boards. Of course, these days they get to be circulated internally via emails and all of that. And the head of human resources for that particular ministry did put out that, and the ministry itself acknowledged that that did happen. And the rest of it was clearly the interpretation of the rest of the country. But certainly one of the things that gave this memo, I think, wings to make it travel so far and create the uproar that has followed has been the situation of the country with respect to agriculture and the quadrupling of food prices and food shortages in the last in the last year or more in the country. Tammy?
So really, Jonathan, what is the area of contention here? What is it that has the citizens of Nigeria on tenterhooks right now?
So, I mean, initially, once the memo was leaked out, the what kept fueling it and making it travel was people making jest of the fact that for a country that the United Nations says has got well over 4.4 million people who are struggling to find food. By the way, many Nigerians believe that that figure is even a hugely conservative figure. So many people found it very humorous, to say the least, but actually more angered to say that the official position of a ministry that is meant to be ensuring that the country is food secure, the country has food, and the citizens are able to access this food, that ministry is adopting a spiritual position as part of its measures to try to bring to an end hunger in the country, in a time where people say the hunger in the country is kind of unprecedented. So many people found it to be very offensive that is the approach. Yes, the ministry has come out to explain that it is part of their routine practice to do several things for the welfare of staff. And this particular one was getting staff to pray, which many Nigerians say they struggle to reconcile. But even if it is true, as they have said, that it was meant to just be part of the staff's welfare, how do government officials rather take time that they are meant to be working based on taxpayers' monies being used to finance them? How do they take that kind of time spread across several weeks? Because if you see the memo, it had different dates that were meant to, the first day was meant to be, I think, today, and then another date next week, and then another date subsequently. How do these public officials, civil servants, take time that they should be working to be praying, something they could do in their homes? Why would it be done in the office?
And how has the Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security reacted to the reaction from the citizens?
Well, what the ministry released a follow-up memo by the same staff who signed the earlier memo, and they said that, to paraphrase them, they made it clear that their attention has been drawn to the internal memo that was circulating based on its release by its Human Resources Department, and they say that has been taken out of context. They say that that memo is specifically to address the well-being of staff, just as they already have been doing in a monthly manner. They do aerobic exercises, they do physical fitness exercises. So the prayer was just to address the apprehensiveness of staff over the recent untimely and successive death of management staff of the ministry. So they say the staff also deemed it fit to pray for the country during this intervention.
All right. Jonathan James Demgon, thank you very much. Quite an interesting topic there. I guess the ministry's coming out and saying this is not the strategy to end poverty in the country, but really,
certainly,
but really something to boost the morale of the workers within the ministry. Thank you very much for that update. That's our correspondent in Nigeria. Thank you, James. Jonathan James Mlamgon. Bring us to exactly 15 minutes after 4 p.m. Central African time.
Africa. It's time to plug into the heartbeat of the continent. Tune in to Channel Africa, your go-to radio station that broadcasts in 5 different languages.
L'Afrique du Sud célèbre la journée nationale du
Kabla hujaitwa kwa jina la Double K or more of our forests have been destroyed.
Tamo kutuli bwanji ndi Partido Africano da Independência da Guiné.
See, Channel Africa represents every corner of this amazing land. From Lagos to Cape Town, Nairobi to Dakar, we've got you covered with the freshest news, music, and cultures. So, turn up the volume, feel the rhythm. Enjoy the conversation. Channel Africa, the African perspective. Africa in Business on Channel Africa.
It is exactly 16 minutes after 4 p.m. Central African time. Now, the group of 7, the G7, comprising the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, France, Germany, Italy and Japan, as well as representatives from the European Union and other guests, are meeting in Canada. Ongoing trade instability as a result of U.S. President Donald Trump's trade tariffs is set to dominate the talks. The G7 summit is an event that aims to facilitate a consensus on the biggest global economic and geopolitical challenges and to coordinate actions to tackle them. For more on this, we joined on the line by SABC News correspondent Nick Harper. A very good afternoon to you, Nick. Welcome to Africa in Business.
Good afternoon.
So, Nick, we understand that the G7 meeting in Canada is all about the U.S. President, Donald Trump. How did the other world leaders receive his arrival?
That's right. He got in late last night here to the Kananaskis region in the Rocky Mountains of Canada. He has not yet had any bilateral meetings or met with other groups of 7 nations. We are expecting that in the coming hours. His first order of business will be a bilateral meeting with the Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, who is hosting this year's event. Soon after that, they will be going into their first meeting with all of the G7 nations represented, where they will be talking about the global economy. But of course, the big problem for Donald Trump going into that is he has created a lot of friction in the last few months since he returned to the Oval Office when it comes to the global economy. He has slapped tariffs on every country around the world, started a trade war, which is an increase, an expansion of what we saw during his first term. So he could face a frosty reception during that first meeting where they have to talk about how to stabilize the global economy, how to overcome tariffs and those trade differences. There is that possibility, of course, that he will dominate much of the conversations, much of what takes place here. And there is always the possibility, considering it is Donald Trump, that there could be some surprises, some embarrassing moments. All of that, everyone will be waiting and watching to see exactly what unfolds.
You are on the ground, and there are reports, Nick, that there are some leaders who are asking, is Trump for us? Is he with us, or is he against us? What are you hearing? You did mention that there is a possibility that he may receive a frosty reception, but what are the expectations going into the G summit of the G7 summit, rather, of the outcomes and the Trump factor?
Well, the expectations are incredibly low. Even the White House going into this has acknowledged that they do not expect any major breakthroughs. They do not expect to find consensus in many areas. I think this will be a case of looking for some small wins. Mark Carney has put out a mission statement, a summary of what he has put on his agenda, and many of the things are areas where he hopes even Donald Trump himself will agree, looking at things like how to respond to wildfires, looking at the digital transition, looking at AI, looking at creating jobs and building better infrastructure. Of course, they also need to deal with some of the bigger crises around the world, like the flare-up in Israel and Iran, the ongoing conflict in Ukraine as well. Those are things that will have to be talked about.
There is also the issue
the differences of opinion.
There is also the issue, Nick, of peace and security and protecting communities of the world. Talk to us about that as well. I mean, you did mention the wildfires and the natural disasters. That also forms part of that protection. But now in the backdrop of the conflicts that are arising in the Middle East, what are the expectations regarding that and the United States' own involvement or non-involvement?
Yeah, when it comes to the conflict in the Middle East, obviously now the flare-up between Iran and Israel has been sent really right to the top of the priority list. We are expecting the countries to put out some sort of joint statement calling for de-escalation, calling for maximum restraint. Donald Trump, on his way to the G7 meeting, said he hoped that there would be a deal, but he also told reporters that sometimes they just need to fight it out. It's unclear what will happen.
Are you still with us, Nick? All right, looks like our connection there with Nick a bit delayed and compromised. Nick, are you still with us? Looks like we have lost Nick. That's our SABC News correspondent, Nick Harper, out in Canada, where the G7 summit is currently taking place. We will continue and try and see if we can actually continue our conversation with Nick, should we have him back on the line. Also, we know that July the 9th is just around the corner. And why is that date important? That date is important because that is when that 90-day expires with the Trump pause on those reciprocal tariffs. That 90-day pause expires on the 9th of July, which is less than a month's time. And what then is going to be the next step forward? You know, should we have Nick Harper with us once again? We'll continue that conversation and finding out just how crucial this meeting is for leaders to raise their concerns with Trump. This could be their one opportunity to collectively talk to Trump about the end of the tariffs and then also chart a way forward. It's 22 minutes after 4 p.m. Central African time. We do have Nick Harper back in line with us. Nick, I was just saying to our listeners here on Channel Africa that July the 9th is a rather important date because that's when that 90-day pause on those reciprocal tariffs actually comes to an end. How important is this meeting for the leaders of the world to engage Trump on the end of this deadline and also then to chart a way forward that could be a win-win situation for all countries involved?
Yeah, that deadline is fast approaching. Donald Trump, remember, promised he would get 90 deals done in 90 days with 90 countries. We are almost at the end of those 90 days and only one deal has been done with the UK, and that hasn't been fully ratified yet. South Africa undoubtedly will be wanting to try and get some sort of one-on-one meeting during the course of this time. Really an opportunity to talk trade, to talk about the possibility of reducing those tariffs. Because when that deadline expires, around the beginning of July 9th, we will see incredibly high tariffs being placed on South African goods being imported into the United States. And of course, that is something that not just South Africa wants to avoid, but every country around the world wants to avoid. But of course, it is a question of whether President Ramaphosa will have an opportunity to speak to the US president and whether they will be able to get around to talking about trade and whether a deal can be cut. It is one of those things that everyone wants to get done, but the time is quite simply running out.
It certainly is. Nick Harper, thank you very much for that update. We certainly will be keeping abreast of developments coming out of the G7 summit. That's Nick Harper.
Stay ahead with Africa in Business, where Thami Ngubeni unpacks your go-to source for Africa's economic trends and development.
That was Nick Harper, SABC News correspondent on the G7 summit. We turn our attention now to issues of unemployment. Now, findings from the Access to Finance report released by FinFind and Credit Bureau in South Africa, Experian, suggest that the official unemployment rate in South Africa could well be overstated. However, what truly matters is considering the misalignment between the demand and the supply of funding for micro and small medium enterprises. The statistics South Africa's unemployment rate indicates that quarter one unemployment is at 32.9%, while business and other market industry experts, and that includes the bank Capitec and GG Alcock and Advisory Service, have suggested a more accurate reading, which is between 10 to 15%. And this, they say, is based on a detailed review of bank transactional data. For more on this, Experian's Head of Commercial Strategy and Innovation, Jaco van Jaarsveld, joins us to break this down. A very good afternoon to you, Jaco. Welcome to Africa in Business. Perhaps let's start first with you taking us through the FinFind and Experian 2025 Access to Finance report that used a sample of 10,000 completed MSMEs funding requests between the 1st of September 2023 and the 31st of August 2024. What did you find? What came out of that report? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, and thanks for having me. We looked at, as you said, the 10,000 applications that was completed applications for finance, and quite surprisingly, 86% of those applicants had turnover less than R1 million. Now, what makes that important is the fact that, according to the National Credit Act, if your turnover as a business is less than R1 million, you should be treated as an individual, and therefore the same decisioning or risk criteria applied for funding is that's applied to a consumer will be applied to a business that's got turnover of less than R1 million. So by default, that then suggests that those type of businesses are treated as consumers. And when you look at them and you say, dig a bit further into these applications for finance, about 15% of them use payroll systems. And this is where the interesting numbers start coming through. So if you consider that 85% of them don't use payroll systems, number one, and number two, they have between 5 and less people working in these small businesses, including the owner of the business, one would argue that there's a case to be made that the Statistics SA's unemployment number could potentially be overstated. And as you said, the recent numbers or the recent comments released by Capitec in terms of unemployment being slightly lower, significantly lower, could in fact be close to accurate, simply because a large portion of these small and medium micro and medium enterprises don't use payroll systems. You'll typically see those payments go into these transaction accounts or consumer transaction accounts as just normal revenue or cash flow that's going into the account, not typically described as a salary or a payment from a business, as it is very few of them use these payroll accounts. So there's certainly a case to be made that the true unemployment number is somewhere between the 10% stated by Capitec and the 33% roughly from the last quarter.
So shouldn't, Jaco, all regular income, whether it's attached to a payroll or not, as long as it's habitual, should that not then be accounted for, as opposed to sporadic deposits? Because clearly if these people are employed, then they are getting a regular income, whether or not it is accompanied by a payslip.
100% correct. The challenge with that is, if you look at the way that the South African, the Stats SA collects the data, it's interviews with individuals, right? So those interviews with individuals either says, yes, I earn income, or no, I don't earn income. And if you start thinking about what the banks would see the transaction data, which Stats SA won't see. And that's where the important thing about making this type of data that the banks see through transaction accounts more freely available. Because that would immediately, if all the bank's transaction data, for instance, is made freely available, like in countries like the UK, where open banking is regulated and this type of transaction data is visible for everyone to see, you will easily or far more accurately be able to determine whether there's a regular income going into a person's bank account, which by definition could then be argued that if there's a regular income going into a person's bank account, that it could be deemed to be a salary of some sorts, even though if there's no descriptor of a salary.
So this has caused a bit of controversy because what this does, it challenges the integrity of the Statistics SA process as well as the outcomes thereof. Have other banks come out in support of the theory that Capitec has put forward, because they too have this transactional data?
Not that I've seen. So I think Capitec is the first and only bank that's come out and stated it. And as you mentioned, Gigi Alcock as well has made made comments around the insights that he's gathered through his research in terms of the informal economy, which is quite interesting and detailed. So the research in terms of the Kasi economy that Gigi Alcock does is quite phenomenal, and it actually tells you a lot more of what's going on in the South African economy. That the challenge that Statistics SA has, as I mentioned, these are interviews. Now, if you think about the most important thing when you look at these definitions of using the alternative data to determine whether someone's employed, if you look at the number, for instance, that Capitec quoted, and you say to yourself, but there's still 28 odd million people that receive SASSA payments, then you think about, well, how can there be so many people receiving those type of payments, but still by definition a big portion of them potentially are employed? And that's where the key thing comes in. There's a big difference, and one should always consider, is being employed a sufficient enough income to make a living? And I think what we also need to do is, when we look at an unemployment number, it should be income. It should be income that actually is sufficient for someone to make a living off. And that's why I think there's a big component of people earning incomes that's not classified as incomes, that's not stated as income when they're interviewed by Stats SA, and still claim for SASSA payments in terms of adding those revenues together to give sufficient income to actually make a living. And that to me is far more important than a debate around what's the unemployment rate and what it's not.
And also, when you're talking about employment, is it really about being employed by somebody else, or is it being about having the ability to be able to generate a living income? I guess that also is another question to be asked. But we'll leave that, Jaco, for another day. Thank you so much for your insight this afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's Experience Head of Commercial Strategy and Innovation, Jaco van Jaarsveld. He takes us to exactly 4:30 Central African time. Let's head over now to the markets desk, where we look at the latest market indicators with Nosipho Zuma.
Business News on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Thami. Good afternoon. In your business indicators this hour, one US dollar is trading at 17 Rand 93 in South Africa, and Botswana is trading at 13 Pula 29. Namibia, it is trading at 17 Namibian dollars 93. The Zambian kwacha is trading at 24 kwacha 17 to the US dollar. In Kenya, the dollar is trading at 128 shilling 48. In Ethiopia, it is trading at 135 bir 18. In Uganda, it is trading at 3,000 shilling 585. In Tanzania, it is trading at 2,594. One US dollar in Nigeria is trading at 1,541,094 naira. In Egypt, the dollar is trading at 49 Egyptian pound 69. In Tunisia, it is trading at 2 dinar 926. In Algeria, it is trading at 129 dinar 68. In Morocco, the dollar is trading at 9 dirham 07. In Angola, the dollar is trading at 9.11 kwanza 11, while the Congolese franc is trading at 2,853 to the US dollar. Looking at commodities, gold is trading at $3,417 and platinum at $1,238 per ounce. The price of Brent crude oil is at $73.61 a barrel. Now, for any business news stories you would like to share with us, please send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 11 714 4459. For Channel Africa Business, I'm Nosipho Zuma.
Business News on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
And the latest from the business of sport, here is Figile Lingwati.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Thami. Good afternoon. Let's begin with the business of cricket. The World Test Championship winning Protea squad, having only become the best team on the planet and written their names in the history books, they've also bagged a pot of gold after beating Australia in the final at Lord's on Saturday. While Themba Bavuma and company names will go down in history as the first senior Proteas team to win a major ICC trophy of significance, and since the victory in the Champions Trophy in 1998, they will also bank large checks from the International Cricket Council in the coming days. The ICC announced at Lord's that the winners of the match would take home a purse of $3.6 million. It is more than double $1.6 million what New Zealand in 2021 and Australia 2023 earned after winning the previous two test finals. Australia, as runners-up, will bank $2.1 million. This is also significantly more than what the previous runners-up took home, namely $800,000. The playing squads and coaching staffs are expected to split the winnings between them. This is how the teams have been paid. Third place, India, $1.44 million. Fourth place, New Zealand, $1.2 million. Fifth, England, $960,000. Sixth, Sri Lanka, $840,000. Seventh, Bangladesh, $720,000. Eighth, West Indies, $600,000, and on the ninth spot, it's Pakistan, $480,000. Now, football news. Controversial Zimbabwe businessman Wignell Chivayo has donated $250,000 to Zimbabwe football giants Highlanders. Chivayo's sponsorship to Boso comes a few months after he settled the club's $26,500 debt to former coach Baltimore Brito, hence bailing out the club from a FIFA ban. The flamboyant businessman added that the sponsorship is part of a $1 million package, which he will further disburse next year. He says this is just but part of a broader sponsorship package of $1 million that will run over the next year to help the club to secure new talent and cover player sign-on fees in order to foster a more competitive 2025 Premier Soccer League. Further read in his post that that team had a poor start in the preparation due to lack of finances. The Bulawayo-based side even failed to make meaningful signings of new players after losing key players to better paying clubs. Amajita coach Raymond Mdaga says he's not going to allow his much talked about salary to distract him from his preparations for the forthcoming FIFA Under-20 Men's World Cup. Mdaga, who hails from Nguwa outside Tzaneen in the South Africa's Limpopo province, was speaking during his homecoming event in his town from the Limpopo's Capric district. It was organized in his honor by the Greater Tzaneen municipality. Mdaga says people are speaking a lot about the salary he received from SAFA as if it's a big issue. He says for him, his salary is not a big deal. To save his country while at the same time doing what he is passionate about is the issue. The municipality gifted the World Cup bound coach close to $2,000. Meanwhile, at the same time, in his reply to the public outcry about Mdaga's salary, South Africa's Minister of Sports, Getty McKenzie, says no one, including him, has a right to talk about his salary because no one was privy to the closed doors contract negotiations. He says after his achievement of qualifying for the World Cup, he can now go back and renegotiate his contract, and him as a minister is willing to support him.
He did a good job. He now qualifies for much more. He has good reason to renegotiate his package. We were not there. If he has a problem with that 50, he should not have accepted that 50,000. But it's now very popular to say, no, it's not right. This is how life works. You don't get what you deserve. You get what you negotiate. Bruce negotiated $1 million. This one negotiated 50,000. Let us rather fix. He must now come back to the table and renegotiate on the basis of his win. And I'm going to support him for them to pay them more.
Let's end with American JJ Spawn, who earned the biggest payday of his career as he hung tough to win the dramatic US Open on Sunday. The American had been a mainstay at the top of his career. Spawn would come up clutch over, and he is number 17 to follow by the major moment as he held a mammoth part. Spawn will cash a check of $4.3 million, bigger than Rory McIlroy's $4.2 million he earned for winning the Masters earlier this year. For any sports stories you'd like to share with us, please send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +2711 714 4459. This is Channel Africa Sport with me, Fide Lungwati.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African perspective. Africa in business on Channel Africa.
It is exactly 4:40 Central African time. Do continue engaging with us on our various social media platforms. On X, you'll find us at Channel Africa 1. On Instagram, Channel Africa 1. And YouTube, also at Channel Africa 1. Our address on Facebook is at Channel Africa. If you have any stories that you'd like to share, whether they be sport or business, do let us know. And you can send those emails to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za.
Connecting Africa to the world. Africa in Business with Thami Ngubeni brings you the latest insights on Africa's economy.
The oil price shot up on Friday following the escalation of war between Israel and Iran, sending shockwaves in global oil markets and currencies, including South Africa's rand. African economies are expected to feel the impact of the higher oil price immediately and, in some instances, could see a price surge at the pumps and a rise in inflation as fuel forms a big part of headline inflation. Dimakatso Leshuru has the details.
Iran has threatened to shut down the Strait of Hormuz, the only seaway into the Persian Gulf, after it and Israel exchanged strikes since Friday last week. The Hormuz oil artery links the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea. It accounts for 20% of the global oil consumption. If the Islamic Republic of Iran follows through with its threat, there are concerns that this may spread the war to other parts of the region and may result in the oil price surging beyond the Friday shock that drove the price of Brent crude oil from $68 a barrel to $74. Former senior economist at the United Nations based in Cameroon, Bernard Wanji, says right now the impact may be limited to the spot price of Brent crude, that is the current market price, because all contracts are hedged and entered into months in advance.
What you see now, you have seen the spot prices going up from $60 to $70 per barrel, or from $64 to $71 per barrel, depending on the grade, which is an increase of 15%. But you have to know that the spot market is only 20% of the volume that is shipped on a daily basis, because most of the sales are done on future contracts and contracts with delivery at 60 days, 90 days. So when you have a significant change in spot market, like we have seen during the past week, it will have an impact if the event will last more than 3 months.
He says Iran is unlikely to carry out its threat to close the Strait of Hormuz.
Ironically, it is an oil exporting country, so it's threatening to cut the supply lines of oil, but yet it derives its revenues from oil exportation. So I don't think that Iran has any interest in disrupting the oil market and the supply chain for a long period. Yes, it can affect production in the country that is targeted, but there is plenty of oil in several producing regions in the world, in the Gulf of Guinea, in the Gulf of Mexico, in the North Sea, and there is oversupply. There is an oversupply of 2 million barrels per day.
If sustained, the high oil price spells bad news for non-oil producing African economies, some of whom have been experiencing a respite in inflation. In South Africa, headline inflation has been moderating on the back of the lower price of Brent crude, but consumers who've just seen an increase in the fuel tax and were in line for a small cut in the petrol price at the end of June, according to figures from the Central Energy Fund, could instead see a price increase. The anticipated drop was built on a lower oil price and a rand-dollar exchange rate of 17 rand 80 to the dollar. Makwe Masilela, Chief Investment Officer at Makwe Fund Managers in Johannesburg, expands.
With the levy that has just been introduced locally, that takes our petrol prices higher, and that doesn't bode well when it comes to the cost of living. And we know that if you have a high cost of living, and we know that our Reserve Bank, their mandate is to fight inflation. So if inflation seems not to be under control, it increases the bets or chances of our central bank increasing interest rates, and that's going to be a double whammy for consumers because their repayments monthly will be higher, and at the same time other expenses will go up because of inflation itself.
But oil-producing nations like Algeria and Nigeria will benefit from the surge in oil price and improve their foreign exchange inflows. If the high oil price is sustained, these countries could experience an immediate relief in fiscal pressures, providing a windfall and strengthening of local currencies against the US dollar. Wanji explains.
Most of the African countries that export oil are also highly indebted. Ironically, because oil is a commodity, you want it, but once you have it, you spend more than you can earn. So you have Algeria, which is a large oil exporting country, is running a deficit of 3% of GDP. Nigeria, the same. Angola, 4% of GDP deficit. And then fiscal deficit also. The fact that oil prices has been rising during the past few days, we provide what we call a windfall. A windfall is a sudden and unexpected increase in revenue compared to what you had budgeted before. So I hope that they will use that windfall to sustain the currency and eliminate some of the fiscal problems and pay off some debt that are in arrears.
Even with the recent increase in the price of Brent crude, it is still 10% lower than the same period last year. For Channel Africa News, I'm Dimakatsule Shoro in Johannesburg.
The Midnight Snack, 12 to 3 a.m.
Interracial relationships. And now you are based in the States and you are married to a beautiful white woman, white lady.
I learned that, for us in our culture, we literally can speak our mind. I remember when we had started dating and whatnot, and, she picked up like a little bit of weight. And maybe me, I was like, oh, wow, you must be happy in this relationship because look at you. You look great. You're even picking up some weight. And she got really, really offended. And it took I think it was about a couple of hours before I could realize that, because I could tell that she was off after that. And it took me a while to figure out what it was. Until later when I was talking to her, I'm like, you're really, really off today. And then she expressed that, yeah, because you're telling me that I'm picking up some weight. And I'm like, in my culture, when you are gaining some weight, it means you're happy.
Yes.
So that's what I was trying to imply.
The Midnight Snack, every Monday, 12 to 3 a.m. with Chanduko Ligege. Africa in Business on Channel Africa.
It is exactly 4:47 Central African time. If you've just joined us, this is Africa in Business on Channel Africa. Let's take a look now at the latest business and financial market developments in Ethiopia. And for this conversation, we're joined by Merid Fikrihanis, founder and CEO of Pragma Investment Advisory. A very good afternoon to you. Great to have you with us once again.
Pleasure to be on the show, as always.
Now, the Ethiopian government, Mered, is preparing to introduce a raft of new taxes on fuel as well as vehicles, and this includes a 15% value-added tax, a 15% excise duty on fuel, and a separate motor vehicle circulation tax on fuel cars. Could you tell us more about this as well as the reaction that this has received?
Yes. I mean, the reaction quite has been has been challenging, to be honest with you, on the ground. One thing we observe in the market is the government has done it because it has been 12 months now that since we floated the currency, and then at the same time, one of the things the Ethiopian government has to do as part of the reform program under the IMF and also other partners is that it needs to galvanize its resource mobilization, specifically tax revenue mobilization, so that it could accommodate the spending that it requires, right? So if you see it if you see Ethiopia to other sub-Saharan Africa countries, Ethiopia is one of the lowest country that tax in terms of tax to GDP ratio. The sub-Saharan African average is 15%, 15%. Their government tax 15% of the GDP. However, in Ethiopia, it tax around 6.3% of the GDP, right? So right now the plan is to catch up in the next 3 years up to make it 13% of the GDP. So as part of that, the government is trying to galvanize its revenue in each pocket of the economy, mainly, and this has been introduced on the VAT, levying VAT sales tax on fuels and excise tax. It seems that the government wants to mobilize the revenue as much as possible because it has pressure in terms of, since the new monetary policy has been implemented, all policy rates, all interest rates are above the policy rate of 15%. So Treasury bills is yielding 16.5%. So which means it is quite a burden on the central government to accommodate this. And then more importantly, since we have floated the currency, the price used to be half of it in terms of what the government put in. So in terms of basically it push debt services by 100%, interest payment has gone up, procurement of fuels has gone up. Mind you, we used to procure $4.8 billion of fuel by 58 birr for $1. But right now it's under 36 birr. So it creates a lot of pressure. So that pressure is being reverberated within the economy in a form of tax collection, which the government is sort of pushing the private sector in terms of by gathering taxes on all out front, so that it would accommodate the deficit without printing new money. Because the central government, the Ministry of Finance, has not taken any new monetary financing from the central bank. So, one thing is we can say that the government is being cornered and the market is being cornered. So, and then you're feeling the pressure on the private sector side, on the tax side. And then at the same time, there's a tight liquidity because we're under a tight monetary policy.
Certainly, as you're highlighting there, Mired, pressure all round. Let's take a look now and focus. Sorry, I did lose you there for a moment. I think our line was compromised. But I'd like us to look now at the efforts that are being made to modernize the country's banking system, to modernize the financial markets. The National Bank of Ethiopia now issuing a draft directive to introduce digital records.
Yes. So yes, this is part of the monetary and fiscal policy reform. So one of the things that the Treasury bills used to be conducted on a physical certificate. So starting from July, which is the coming July, it will be dematerialized, and all government Treasury securities and debt or budget deficit financing will be conducted under through electronic transaction through ESX, the newly established exchange. And as part of that, the banks, the pension fund will come to the ASX platform, will buy these treasury instruments from a dematerialized CACD, which will reside within the central bank. Basically, it effectively makes it efficient to issue debt securities for the government and mobilize the deficit financing through dematerialized treasury bills. So, which is one aspect of the fiscal policy reform, and more importantly, this is very critical for the central bank to manage liquidity and also manage interbank lending markets, so that it set the policy rate in the coming September when the new monetary policy starts in. So this is one of the biggest reforms. I think it will start to be implemented the coming July, and the coming July from July 2025 to up to June 2026. So this is one of the new initiatives the government is doing.
There are also concerns, Mired, around the liquidity crunch that commercial banks are at the brink of. Could you tell us more about this, as well as the dynamics of why there are concerns around this? I know it's got to do with issues of, structural factors as well.
Yes, there are two factors, I think. Before we implemented and we floated the currency, the central bank, it has been almost 2 years that it put a credit cap. So it basically curbs the banks not lending a previous from their fiscal year. The credit aggregate should not grow first, initially 14%, 14%. Now it has been capped up to 18%. And then at the same time, every time the banks issue a loan by obligatory with obligation, 20% of that loan, they are obligated to buy treasury notes with yield for 5 years with 9% interest rate. So that will expire this coming June. After 25 days, that will stop. So this has been sort of a financial repressionary instruments that has been in the market, which sort of reduce the liquidity of the banks or reduce the credit that has been pumped into the economy and into the real economy. So that has created a liquidity crunch. So as part of that, the first thing is that this mandatory treasury note buying will cease by June, by end of June, this coming June, and then by September, the coming September, the credit cap will be removed and the credit will be pumped again. So that's our expectation. This has been a transition point to implement the new monetary policy, which has been initiated by the central bank in order to reduce the liquidity, in order to reduce the flow of money, so that when you float the bird is not skyrocketed, it's not hit up the roof. So it is a policy measure that has been taken, but it will be removed, as I said, the first one June and then the next one by September.
Let's wrap up by taking a look at what the Ethiopian government has called the liberalization drive as far as opening up Ethiopia's financial sector. Tell us more about that, and we see that a lot of progress is being made in that regard, with Kenya's KCB Group Limited being the first foreign banking institution to join Ethiopia's financial sector.
Yes, I mean, Ethiopia, as part of the reform of the financial sector, mind you, Ethiopia is one of the oldest countries that used to have foreign banks back in the days. We used to have Barclays and other British bank operating here. But we're sort of reopening the sector after 5 decades. So the central bank is expecting to receive license by June 2026. By January 2026. So after 6 months, it will be done with the required frameworks to accept foreign banks. And so far, KCB announced that it would come in with a subsidiary in terms of acquiring an existing bank up to 49% shares, working with the local bank. This is a very good development, and I'm sure we know that equity is watching closely. We know that Nigerian banks are also watching the development very closely, because it's a 120 million country. The banked population is 55%, so there is unbacked population. Almost half of the population is unbacked. The economy is one of the biggest economies in sub-Saharan Africa.
Certainly.
So with the GDP.
Yeah, certainly a lot of opportunities. Certainly a lot of opportunities for those in the banking sector in Ethiopia. Yeah. Thank you once again, Mered Fikiruhanis.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be on the show.
He's founder and CEO of Pragma Investment Advisory. A look there at the Ethiopian markets. Brings us to exactly 4:57 Central African time. As we wrap up Africa in Business, we say bonjour to you, Joël.
Bonjour Thami, bonjour à tous les auditeurs de Channel Africa. Alors sur Vue d'Afrique, aujourd'hui il sera question du Tchad. Les autorités judiciaires mettent en garde contre toute enquête parallèle menée par des journalistes sur le massacre de Mandakao. Nous parlerons également de la célébration ce 16 juin en Afrique du Sud de la Journée nationale de la jeunesse, mais aussi du Nigeria où au moins 100 personnes ont été tuées. Les détails, c'est dans la grande actualité de Vue d'Afrique. Merci de rester connecté. Merci Thami.
Merci, Joël. That's Vue d'Afrique coming up in just a moment. That's how we come to the end of this Monday, June the 16th edition of Africa in Business. I'm Thami Ngubeni. Thank you to our entire team, our producer, Mabu Boloka, our technical producer, Katu Maduba, as well as on social media, Nzako Mashaba. Until we meet again tomorrow, over now to the French team with Vue d'Afrique.
magazine des actualités en français sur Channel Africa. Rendez-vous du lundi au vendredi avec Joël Mouteba sur Channel Africa de 15h à 16h, temps universel. Channel Africa, la perspective africaine.
Bonjour à tous et merci d'avoir honoré ce nouveau numéro de... Et je suis Joël Mouteba à ce microphone. Kato assure la mise en onde de cette édition d'information dont voici les grandes lignes. Au Tchad, les autorités judiciaires mettent en garde contre toute enquête parallèle menée par des journalistes ou des acteurs de la société civile sur le massacre de Mandakao. Nous parlerons également de la célébration ce 16 juin en Afrique du Sud de la Journée nationale de la jeunesse. Le vice-président appelle à accélérer les interventions en faveur des jeunes pour leur permettre de réaliser des gains économiques. Et enfin, pour les grands titres de ce soir au Nigeria, au moins 100 personnes ont été tuées dans une ville du centre-nord du Nigeria à la suite d'une attaque nocturne menée par des hommes armés. Voilà donc pour les grands titres que j'aurai le réel plaisir de développer tout à l'heure après le bulletin d'information que nous présente Joël Kabongo. Bonjour Kabongo.
Bonjour Joël.
SABC, actualité. La perspective africaine.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous, bienvenue à cette première édition de la semaine. L'Afrique du Sud commémore ce lundi 16 juin la Journée nationale de la jeunesse. Cette commémoration rappelle le massacre des élèves des Soweto par le gouvernement d'apartheid en 1976. Pour cette édition 2025, le thème est « Des compétences pour un monde en mutation, donner aux jeunes les moyens d'une participation économique participative », ainsi que l'a souligné le vice-président sud-africain Paul Mashatile dans son adresse à la nation. Aujourd'hui, nous honorons et rendons hommage aux jeunes gens courageux et intrépides qui ont été à l'avant-garde de la lutte pour la libération le 16 juin 1976. Malgré leur jeune âge, les jeunes de 1976 ont tenu bon face au système oppressif du régime de l'apartheid. Ils ont affronté la mort avec une détermination inébranlable